Thank you for choosing American Pest CEUs. Hi, I'm Sean Reeves. I'm an Associate Certified Entomologist with American Pest CEUs. I've been in the pest management industry since 1999, and I'll be your instructor for today's course. Today's course was compiled by Jack Launius, who has served in the pest management industry since 1990.
So today, we're tackling restricted entry intervals, REIs. For pesticide-treated areas.
Exactly. We're diving into the official guidelines. Basically, an REI is just that stay-out time after a pesticide application.
Right, to keep workers safe.
Yeah, keeps them safe from exposure. And you find that time period right on the pesticide label itself, usually under agricultural use requirements in the directions for use section.
Or sometimes right next to the crop listed.
Sometimes, yeah, or the specific application method. It varies a bit.
Okay. So our mission today really is to untangle the rules for when workers can go back in before that official REI is up. Because the basic rule is stay out, but there are exceptions.
There are, and that's where it gets tricky. So we want to make that clear. It's super important for farm safety.
Absolutely. So lay it out for us. What's the employer's main job here?
Okay, fundamentally, the employer must keep workers out during the REI. That's the baseline.
The exceptions.
Right. But there are basically two main ways workers can enter early. First, if they will have absolutely zero contact with any pesticide residue. None.
Okay, zero contact. What's the second?
The second is for very specific situations where some contact might happen, but the work itself is really limited and controlled.
Gotcha.
And we should also just mention, trained and equipped pesticide handlers operate under different rules when they're actually doing handler tasks. Agricultural workers.
Okay, let's dig into that first one then. Early entry with no contact. What's the absolute bottom line?
The core idea is, like I said, workers can go in only if they won't touch any pesticide residue at all.
And where might that residue be hiding? It's not just on the plants, right?
No, definitely not. It could be on the crops, sure, but also weeds. It could be in or on the soil or potting mix, whatever they're using.
Okay.
Also think about water, irrigation water, even puddles on the ground. And the air itself, especially after fumigation or, fogs or mists before everything settles.
Okay. So it's pretty comprehensive. And I noticed a key point in the guidance, just wearing PPE, like gloves or boots, doesn't count as no contact here, does it?
No, absolutely not. That's crucial. Using PPE doesn't magically make it no contact for this specific exception. The whole point here is avoiding the contact in the first place.
Right. So what are some real-world examples where this no contact entry would actually be okay after sprays or dusts have settled, obviously?
Well, think about someone walking down aisles or pathways, like established farm roads or footpaths within the treated area, as long as the plants aren't going to brush against them and nothing's dripping on them.
And they just wear normal work boots.
Yep, standard footwear is fine for that. No special PPE needed for this exception.
Okay, what else?
Being inside a vehicle can work. But again, the key is no plants brushing against the vehicle, nothing tripping into it.
Like a tractor with a closed cab.
Exactly. An enclosed cab is a perfect example.
What if the pesticide was put directly into the soil? Like injected?
Good question. If it was incorporated or injected, then you can do some tasks. But only if you're not disturbing that treated soil below the surface.
So, no digging.
Right. No digging, no turning the soil over. And again, driving through in a totally enclosed cab where no residue gets in, that works too.
Got it. So no contact means absolutely zero physical interaction. And the big advantage is these workers don't need all that extra protective gear required for other early entry situations.
That's a really important distinction, because if any contact is expected, even a little bit, well, then a whole different set of rules applies, much stricter.
Which brings us to that second category, early entry with contact.
Exactly. Early entry where contact might happen.
So when is it okay for workers to touch treated surfaces during an REI? It sounds like it's pretty rare.
It is. It's only allowed in very specific, limited situations. The guidelines basically break it down into three main types.
Okay, what are they?
First, short-term tasks. These have to be less than 1 hour total, and they cannot involve anything defined as hand labor.
Hand labor. Okay, we'll need to define that. What's the second term?
Second is emergency tasks. Stuff that has to be done because there's been an officially declared agricultural emergency.
Okay. Like a natural disaster?
Sort of, yeah. We'll get into specifics. And the third category is specific tasks that the EPA itself has approved through a special exception process.
Okay, 3 categories. Let's circle back to hand labor. You said short-term tasks can't involve it. What exactly is hand labor according to these rules? Sounds critical.
It really is. Hand labor is basically any farm work done by hand, or maybe with handheld tools, where you're likely to have significant contact with those treated surfaces, the plants, the soil, whatever.
Can you give some examples?
Oh yeah, the list is long. Things like packing produce out in the field, harvesting fruits or vegetables by hand, detasseling corn, thinning out crops, weeding by hand.
Wow, okay. Keep going.
Topping plants, planting by hand, girdling trees, cane work, removing suckers, pruning, disbudding flowers, roguing that's pulling out diseased or unwanted plants, all that stuff.
That covers a huge amount of common farm work. But what's explicitly not hand labor, I saw a note about irrigation equipment.
Right, good catch. Operating, moving, or fixing irrigation or watering equipment, that is specifically not considered hand labor.
Okay, that's a key difference.
It is. And actually, those irrigation tasks can sometimes fall under one of those EPA-approved exceptions we mentioned.
Ah, interesting. Okay. So before we get to the EPA stuff, tell me more about the agricultural emergency tasks. What counts as an emergency here? It can't just be like, my tractor broke down.
No, definitely not just a breakdown. For this exception, a state, tribal, or even a federal agency has to officially declare an agricultural emergency exists.
An official declaration.
Yes, based on conditions that exist or have happened or are even forecast that pose a real threat to agriculture in the area. Think big things: major flooding, hail damage, high winds, hurricane, tornado, a bad freeze or frost.
Got it. So major widespread events. Now, what about those EPA-approved specific tasks? You said there were two types.
Yeah, two main types under that umbrella. The first is called limited contact tasks.
Limited contact, okay.
These are tasks that couldn't have been predicted, they really can't wait, and here's that key phrase again: they do not involve hand labor.
No hand labor, got it. And what does limited contact mean?
It means contact is minimal, and it's restricted just to the worker's feet, their lower legs, hands, and forearms. That's it.
So not getting residue all over their body.
Exactly. And just to be super clear, none of those hand labor tasks we listed earlier, harvesting, weeding, pruning, none of those count as limited contact tasks.
Okay. What are some examples then of these allowed limited contact tasks?
Think about things like fixing essential weather monitoring gear, or maybe frost protection equipment right when a sudden freeze is coming.
Okay, time-sensitive stuff.
Right, or repairing the HVAC system in a greenhouse, if it breaks unexpectedly. Fixing other field equipment too, as long as it's not application or irrigation gear. Oh, and moving or maintaining beehives falls in here too.
Interesting. Beehives. Okay, so that's limited contact. What was the second type of EPA-approved task?
That one is specifically irrigation tasks.
Ah, back to the irrigation equipment.
Exactly. This covers the necessary work of operating, moving, or repairing irrigation or watering systems. Like the limited contact tasks, these jobs can't be delayed, and they only involve that same minimal contact feet, lower legs, hands, forearms.
So what makes them different from the limited contact category then?
The key difference is time. These specific irrigation tasks are ones that are expected to take more than 1 hour inside that REI area to get done.
Ah, okay. Because the short-term tasks we mentioned first had that 1 hour cap.
Precisely. So this carves out an exception for those necessary longer irrigation jobs.
Makes sense. Okay, so for all these situations where contact might happen short-term, limited contact, irrigation, and emergencies, there are specific conditions that have to be met, right? I saw a table in the guidance.
Yes, absolutely. There's a set of conditions, and they vary slightly depending on the type of entry. Let's walk through some key ones.
Okay. First off, there's a minimum wait time after application, isn't there? Like even for these exceptions.
Yes. Across the board, short-term, limited contact, irrigation, emergency. You always have to wait at least 4 hours after the pesticide application is totally finished.
4 hours minimum. Got it. And what about breathing risks? Inhalation.
Also consistent. You have to wait until any inhalation exposure level listed on the label is met, or if there are specific worker protection standard WPS ventilation rules, those have to be met too.
Okay, WPS ventilation criteria. Good point. Now, how long can workers actually be in the treated area? Does that change?
It does. For those short-term tasks, it's a strict maximum of 1 hour in any 24-hour period.
Just 1 hour.
Yep. But for limited contact tasks and for those irrigation tasks, the limit goes up to 8 hours per 24 hours.
8 hours. Okay. And for emergencies?
Interestingly, for a declared agricultural emergency, there's actually no specified time limit for how long the early entry work can take.
Huh. Okay. What about those pesticides that need double notification, like warning signs and telling people verbally? Does that affect early entry?
It can, yes. For short-term tasks and for emergency entry, you can still go in even if it's a double notification pesticide.
Okay.
However, for limited contact tasks and for irrigation tasks, early entry is not allowed if that pesticide requires both posted signs and oral warnings.
Ah, that's a key restriction for those two categories. Now, the big question, hand labor. Is it ever allowed during these contact possible early entries?
Only, and I mean only in the case of a declared agricultural emergency. And even then, the hand labor has to be directly related to fixing the emergency situation.
So definitely no hand labor for short-term limited contact or irrigation tasks.
Absolutely forbidden for those.
And what about safety gear and procedures? Do employers have to provide special protections for all these types of contact entry?
Yes, for all 4 short-term limited contact, irrigation, and emergency. If workers are entering early and might have contact, the employer must provide specific protections.
Okay, always required. Good. Now, the table also mentioned something about whether the need for entry was foreseeable. Does that matter?
It does for some. For short-term tasks, it doesn't really matter if you could have predicted the need or not.
Okay.
But for limited contact, irrigation, and emergency entry, the need generally should not have been anticipated. It reinforces that these are exceptions for, unexpected stuff.
Right. Not for routine planned work during an REI. And the last point in the table was about economic necessity.
Yeah. Again, for short-term tasks, it's not a factor. But for limited contact and irrigation tasks, early entry is only okay if not doing the work would cause significant economic loss.
Okay, a financial justification.
Right. And for agricultural emergencies, it's basically allowed if early entry is the only practical way to stop or reduce major economic losses caused by that emergency.
Wow. Okay, that breakdown really shows how many layers there are to these exceptions. So let's get into those special protections you mentioned. What exactly does an employer have to provide for these early entry workers who might have contact?
Okay, several critical things. First, they need full pesticide safety training, specific instructions for the task, and all the relevant safety info. And this is super important, that normal 5-day grace period for training workers. It does not apply here.
So they need the training before they go in?
Absolutely. Before setting foot in that area for early entry work. No exceptions.
Makes total sense. What kind of specific instructions do they need?
The employer has to tell them, in a way they understand, exactly how to put on, use, and take off the required PPE correctly.
Okay.
They also have to stress how important it is to wash thoroughly after taking the PPE off. And critically, they need info on preventing heat illness, how to spot it, what the symptoms are, and basic first aid for it.
Yeah, heat illness is a big risk, especially wearing PPE. What about info from the pesticide label itself?
Also required. The employer has to communicate the key safety stuff from the label. Human hazard warnings, first aid steps, signs and symptoms of poisoning for that specific chemical, exactly what PPE is needed for early entry, and any other safety rules on that label.
So really thorough communication is key. What about the decontamination supplies? What needs to be available?
Right, decon supplies. Employers have to provide enough clean water for routine washing and for emergency eye flushing. Plus, soap and single-use towels. Enough for everyone.
And where do these supplies need to be?
Good question. They can't be in the area being treated, obviously, and ideally not in an area still under REI, unless, that's the only way to make them accessible.
Accessible? How close is accessible?
The rule is reasonably accessible, which they define as within a quarter mile of where the early entry workers are.
Quarter mile, okay. What about specifically for eye washing?
If the pesticide label requires protective eyewear, then the employer has to provide at least a pint of emergency eye wash water for each worker. And it has to be immediately accessible right where they are.
Immediately accessible, got it.
And one more thing on washing where they take off their PPE, there needs to be soap, clean towels, and enough water right there for them to wash thoroughly.
Okay, comprehensive decon setup. And the last piece of the protection puzzle is the PPE itself. Right?
Exactly. The employer must provide the specific early entry PPE that's listed on the pesticide label, period.
They just provide it.
Provide it and make sure the workers actually wear it and wear it correctly while doing the task. Just handing it out isn't enough. They have to ensure proper use.
Wow. Okay. This has been incredibly detailed. We've really unpacked REIs and especially these complex exceptions.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to keep track of.
So for everyone listening, trying to get this right, I guess the main takeaway is that dealing with these REI exceptions needs real care, real attention to detail.
Absolutely. You have to look closely at the type of entry, exactly what task needs doing, and then follow all the mandatory safety steps if there's any chance of contact.
And always, always go back to that pesticide label. That's your primary guide for the REI length and any specific early entry PPE.
Couldn't agree more. Understanding those specifics is vital, not just for staying compliant, but really for protecting the health and safety of the people doing the work.
Congratulations, you have completed the course. Please proceed to the exam to receive your credit.